Part 3. The Party. I pass to the question of the party. The present Congress is taking place under the flag of the complete victory of Leninism, under the flag of the liquidation of the remnants of the anti-Leninist groups. The anti-Leninist group of Trotskyites has been smashed and scattered. Its organizers are now to be found in the backyards of the bourgeois parties abroad. The anti-Leninist group of the right deviators has been smashed and scattered. Its organizers have long ago renounced their views and are now trying in every way to expiate the sins they committed against the party. The groups of nationalist deviators have been smashed and scattered. Their organizers have either completely merged with the interventionist émigrés or else they have recanted. The majority of the adherents to these anti-revolutionary groups had to admit that the line of the party was correct, and they have capitulated to the party. At the 15th Party Congress, it was still necessary to prove that the party line was correct and to wage a struggle against certain anti-Leninist groups. And at the 16th Party Congress, we had to deal the final blow to the last adherents of these groups. Footnote there, the 15th Congress of the CPSUB took place in Moscow, December 2 to 19, 1927. On December 3rd, J.V. Stalin delivered the political report of the Central Committee of the CPSUB, and on December 7 he replied to the discussion. The Congress approved the political and organizational line of the party's Central Committee and instructed it to continue to pursue a policy of peace and of strengthening the defense capacity of the USSR, to continue with unrelaxing tempo the socialist industrialization of the country, to develop to the full the collectivization of agriculture, and to steer a course toward eliminating the capitalist elements from the national economy. In its decisions on the opposition, the Congress noted that the disagreements between the party and the opposition had developed into programmatic disagreements, that the Trotskyist opposition had taken the path of anti-Soviet struggle, and declared that adherence to the Trotskyist opposition and the propagation of its views were incompatible with membership of the Bolshevik Party. The Congress approved the decision of the joint meeting of the Central Committee and Central Control Commission of the CPSUB of November 14, 1927 to expel Trotsky and Zinoviev from the party, and decided to expel from the party all active members of the Trotsky-Zinoviev bloc and the whole, quote, democratic centralism group. For more, see the History of the CPSUB Short Course, Moscow, 1954, and Resolutions and Decisions of CPSU Congresses, Conferences, and Central Committee Plenums, Part 2, 1953. Back to the main text. At this Congress, however, there is nothing to prove, and it seems no one to fight. Everyone sees that the line of the party has triumphed. Here there is thunderous applause. The policy of industrializing the country has triumphed. Its results are obvious to everyone. What arguments can be advanced against this fact? The policy of eliminating the kulaks and of complete collectivization has triumphed. Its results are also obvious to everyone. What arguments can be advanced against this fact? The experience of our country has shown that it is fully possible for socialism to achieve victory in one country taken separately. What arguments can be advanced against this fact? It is evident that all these successes, and primarily the victory of the 5-year plan, have utterly demoralized and smashed all the various anti-Leninist groups. It must be admitted that the party today is united as it has never been before. Here there is stormy and prolonged applause. 1. Questions of ideological and political leadership. Does this mean, however, that the fight is ended, and that the offensive of socialism is to be discontinued as superfluous? No, it does not. Does it mean that all is well in our party, that there will be no more deviations in the party, and that therefore we may now rest on our laurels? No, it does not. We have smashed the enemies of the party, the opportunists of all shades, the nationalist deviators of all kinds, but remnants of their ideology still live in the minds of individual members of the party, and not infrequently they find expression. The party must not be regarded as something isolated from the people who surround it. It lives and works in its environment. It is not surprising that at times unhealthy moods penetrate into the party from outside, and the ground for such moods undoubtedly exists in our country, if only for the reason that there still exist in town and country certain intermediary strata of the population who constitute a medium which breeds such moods. The 17th conference of our party declared that one of the fundamental political tasks in fulfilling the second 5-year plan is, quote, to overcome the survivals of capitalism in economic life and in the minds of people, unquote. And a footnote, the 17th conference of the CPSUB took place in Moscow, January 30 to February 4, 1932. The conference was directed by J.V. Stalin. It discussed G.K. Orionikidze's report on the results of industrial development in 1931 and the tasks for 1932, and the reports of V.M. Molotov and V.V. Kuibyshev on the directives for drawing up the second five-year plan for the development of the national economy of the USSR in 1933 to 37. The conference noted that the decisions of the party congresses on the building and completion of the foundations of a socialist economy and on securing economic independence for the USSR had been carried out with immense success. The conference approved the plan for the development of socialist industry in 1932, which ensured the fulfillment of the first five-year plan in 4 years. In its directives for the drawing up of the second five-year plan, the conference defined the chief political and economic tasks of that plan, pointing out that its main and decisive economic task was the completion of the reconstruction of the entire national economy on the basis of the most up-to-date technique. Back to the main text and repeating that sentence, the 17th conference of our party declared that one of the fundamental political tasks in fulfilling the second five-year plan is, quote, to overcome the survivals of capitalism in economic life and in the minds of the people, unquote. That is an absolutely correct idea, but can we say that we have already overcome all the survivals of capitalism in economic life? No, we cannot say that. Still less can we say that we have overcome the survivals of capitalism in the minds of people. We cannot say that, not only because in development the minds of people lag behind their economic position, but also because the capitalist encirclement still exists, which endeavors to revive and sustain the survivals of capitalism in the economic life and in the minds of the people of the USSR, and against which we Bolsheviks must always keep our powder dry. Naturally, these survivals cannot but be a favorable ground for a revival of the ideology of the defeated anti-Leninist groups in the minds of individual members of our party. Add to this the not very high theoretical level of the majority of our party members, the inadequate ideological work of the party bodies, and the fact that our party functionaries are overburdened with purely practical work, which deprives them of the opportunity of augmenting their theoretical knowledge, and you will understand the origin of the confusion on a number of questions of Leninism that exists in the minds of individual party members, a confusion which not infrequently penetrates into our press and helps to revive the survivals of the ideology of the defeated anti-Leninist groups. That is why we cannot say that the fight is ended and that there is no longer any need for the policy of the socialist offensive. It would be possible to take a number of questions of Leninism and demonstrate by means of them how tenaciously the survivals of the ideology of the defeated anti-Leninist groups continued to exist in the minds of certain party members. Take, for example, the question of building a classless socialist society. The 17th Party Conference declared that we are advancing toward the formation of a classless socialist society. Naturally, a classless society cannot come of its own accord, as it were. It has to be achieved and built by the efforts of all the working people, by strengthening the organs of the dictatorship of the proletariat, by intensifying the class struggle, by abolishing classes, by eliminating the remnants of the capitalist classes, and in battles with enemies, both internal and external. The point is clear, one would think. And yet, who does not know that the enunciation of this clear and elementary thesis of Leninism has given rise to not a little confusion in the minds of a section of party members and to unhealthy sentiments among them? The thesis that we are advancing toward a classless society, put forward as a slogan, was interpreted by them to mean a spontaneous process. And they began to reason in this way. If it is a classless society, then we can relax the class struggle. We can relax the dictatorship of the proletariat and get rid of the state altogether, since it is fated to wither away soon in any case. And they fell into a state of foolish rapture, in the expectation that there soon would be no classes, and therefore no class struggle, and therefore no cares and worries, and therefore it is possible to lay down one's arms and go to bed, to sleep, in expectation of the advent of a classless society. Here there is general laughter. There can be no doubt that this confusion of mind and these sentiments are exactly like the well-known views of the right deviators, who believed that the old must automatically grow into the new, and that one fine day we shall wake up and find ourselves in a socialist society. So commenting, there have been a lot of comparisons between the right deviators, the Bukharinites of this time, and the supporters of Deng Xiaoping and associated ideas in more recent times in China. And this is basically the discussion that happens over and over and over again. So let's read that again. There can be no doubt that this confusion of mind and these sentiments are exactly like the well-known views of the right deviators who believed that the old must automatically grow into the new, and this implied the action of relaxing the class struggle in the countryside, which was a mistake, and that one fine day we shall wake up and find ourselves in a socialist society. So this idea that you can just develop the productive forces, or you can just do whatever and you will get socialism out of it automatically, so to speak, without this struggle, it's wrong. And it seems to me like the more that people are improving their theoretical knowledge, the more people are realizing that. Continuing. As you see, remnants of the ideology of the defeated anti-Leninist groups are capable of revival and are far from having lost their vitality. Naturally, if this confusion of views and these non-Bolshevik sentiments obtained a hold over the majority of our party, the party would find itself demobilized and disarmed. Let us take further the question of the agricultural artel and the agricultural commune. Everybody admits now that under present conditions, the artel is the only correct form of the collective farm movement, and that is quite understandable. A, the artel correctly combines the personal, everyday interests of the collective farmers with their public interests. B, the artel successfully adapts personal, everyday interests to public interests, and thereby helps to educate the individual peasants of yesterday in the spirit of collectivism. Unlike the artel, where only the means of production are socialized, the communes, until recently, socialized not only the means of production but also everyday life of every member of the commune. That is to say, the members of a commune, unlike the members of an artel, did not individually own poultry, small livestock, a cow, grain, or household land. This means that in the commune, the personal, everyday interests of the members have not so much been taken into account and combined with the public interests, as they have been eclipsed by the latter in the interests of petty bourgeois equalization. It is clear that this is the weakest side of the commune. This indeed explains why communes are not widespread, why there are but a few score of them in existence. For the same reason, the communes, in order to maintain their existence and save themselves from going to pieces, have been compelled to abandon the system of socializing everyday life. They are beginning to work on the basis of the workday unit and have begun to distribute grain among their members to permit their members to own poultry, small livestock, a cow, etc. But from this it follows that, in fact, the commune has gone over to the position of the artel. And there's nothing bad in that because it is necessary in the interests of the sound development of the mass collective farm movement. This does not mean, of course, that the commune is not needed at all and that it no longer represents a higher form of the collective farm movement. No, the commune is needed, and it is, of course, a higher form of the collective farm movement. This applies, however, not to the present commune, which arose on the basis of undeveloped technique and of a shortage of produce, and which is itself going over to the position of the artel. It applies to the commune of the future, which will arise on the basis of a more developed technique and of an abundance of produce. The present agricultural commune arose on the basis of an underdeveloped technique and a shortage of produce. This indeed explains why it practiced equalization and took little account of the personal, everyday interests of its members, as a result of which it is now being compelled to go over to the position of the artel, in which the personal and public interests of the collective farmers are rationally combined. The future communes will arise out of developed and prosperous artels. The future agricultural commune will arise when the fields and farms of the artel have an abundance of grain, cattle, poultry, vegetables, and all other produce. When the artels have mechanized laundries, modern kitchens and dining rooms, mechanized bakeries, etc. When the collective farmer sees that it is more to their advantage to get meat and milk from the collective farm's meat and dairy department than to keep their own cow and small livestock. When the woman collective farmer sees that it is more to her advantage to take her meals in the dining room, to get her bread from the public bakery, and to have her linen washed in the public laundry than to do all these things herself. The future commune will arise on the basis of a more developed technique and of a more developed artel, on the basis of an abundance of products. When will that be? Not soon, of course, but it will take place. It would be criminal artificially to accelerate the process of transition from the artel to the future commune. That would confuse the whole issue and would facilitate the work of our enemies. The transition from the artel to the future commune must proceed gradually, to the extent that all the collective farmers become convinced that such a transition is necessary. That is how matters stand with regard to the question of the artel and the commune. One would think that this was clear and almost elementary, and yet there is a fair amount of confusion on this question among a section of party members. There are those who think that by declaring the artel to be the fundamental form of the collective farm movement, the party has drifted away from socialism, has retreated from the commune, from the higher form of the collective farm movement to a lower form. Why, one may ask? Because it is suggested there is no equality in the artel, since differences in the requirements and in the personal, everyday life of the members of the artel are preserved, whereas in the commune there is equality, because the requirements and the personal, everyday life of its members have been made equal. But firstly, we no longer have any communes in which there is leveling, equalization of requirements and personal, everyday life. Practice has shown that the communes would certainly have been doomed had they not abandoned equalization, and had they not in fact gone over to the position of artels. Consequently, there is no point in referring to what no longer exists. Secondly, every Leninist knows, if they're a real Leninist, that equalization in the sphere of requirements and personal everyday life is a reactionary petty bourgeois absurdity worthy of some primitive sect of ascetics, but not of a socialist society organized on Marxist lines. For we cannot expect all people to have the same requirements and tastes, and all people to mold their personal everyday life on the same model. Comment: for more on this topic, see Lenin's A Liberal Professor on Equality, which we have on the channel. Continuing, and finally, are not differences in requirements and in personal everyday life still preserved among the workers? Does that mean that workers are more remote from socialism than members of agricultural communes? These people evidently think that socialism calls for equalization, for leveling the requirements and personal everyday life of the members of society. Needless to say, such an assumption has nothing in common with Marxism, with Leninism. By equality, Marxism means not equalization of personal requirements and everyday life, but the abolition of classes, i.e., A. the equal emancipation of all working people from exploitation after the capitalists have been overthrown and expropriated, B. the equal abolition for all of private property and the means of production after they have been converted into the property of the whole of society, C. the equal duty of all to work according to their ability, and the equal right of all working people to receive in return for this according to the work performed. That's in the lower, earlier phase, a socialist society. And D. the equal duty of all to work according to their ability, and the equal right of all working people to receive in turn for this according to their needs. That is in the later, more advanced communist society. Moreover, Marxism proceeds from the assumption that people's tastes and requirements are not and cannot be identical and equal in regard to quality or quantity, whether in the period of socialism or in the period of communism. There you have the Marxist conception of equality. Marxism has never recognized and does not recognize any other equality. To draw from this the conclusion that socialism calls for equalization, for the leveling of the requirements of the members of society, for the leveling of their tastes and of their personal everyday life, that according to the Marxist plan all should wear the same clothes and eat the same dishes in the same quantity, is to utter vulgarities and to slander Marxism. It is time it was understood that Marxism is an enemy of equalization. Already in the manifesto of the Communist Party, Marx and Engels scourged primitive utopian socialism and termed it reactionary because it preached, quote, universal asceticism. Comment: asceticism is denying yourself worldly pleasures as practiced by some religious groups, continuing, and social leveling in its crudest form, unquote. In his Anti-Düring, Engels devoted a whole chapter to a withering criticism of the, quote, radical equalitarian socialism, unquote, put forward by Düring in opposition to Marxist socialism. Quote, the real content of the proletarian demand for equality, said Engels, is the demand for the abolition of classes. Any demand for equality which goes beyond that, of necessity, passes into absurdity, unquote. Lenin said the same thing, quote, Engels was 1,000 times right when he wrote that to conceive equality as meaning anything beyond the abolition of classes is a very stupid and absurd prejudice. Bourgeois professors have tried to make use of the concept of equality to accuse us of wanting to make all men equal to one another. They have tried to accuse the socialists of this absurdity, which they themselves invented. But in their ignorance, they did not know that the socialists, and precisely the founders of modern scientific socialism, Marx and Engels, said, equality is an empty phrase unless equality is understood to mean the abolition of classes. We want to abolish classes, and in this respect we stand for equality. But the claim that we want to make all men equal to one another is an empty phrase and a stupid invention of intellectuals. That's quoting Lenin's speech on deceiving the people with slogans about liberty and equality. Clear, one would think. Bourgeois writers are fond of depicting Marxist socialism in the shape of the old Tsarist barracks, where everything is subordinated to the, quote, principle of equalization. But Marxists cannot be held responsible for the ignorance and stupidity of bourgeois writers. There can be no doubt that this confusion in the minds of some party members concerning Marxist socialism and their infatuation with the equalitarian tendencies of agricultural communes are exactly like the petty bourgeois views of our leftist blockheads, who at one time idealized the agricultural communes to such an extent that they even tried to set up communes in mills and factories, where skilled and unskilled workers, each working at their trade, had to pool their wages in a common fund, which was then shared out equally. You know what harm these infantile equalitarian exercises of the ultra-left blockheads caused our industry. As you see, the remnants of the ideology of the defeated anti-party groups display rather considerable tenacity. It is obvious that if these leftist views were to triumph in the party would cease to be Marxist, and the collective farm movement would be utterly disorganized. Or take, for example, the slogan, "Make all the collective farmers prosperous." This slogan applies not only to collective farmers, it applies still more to the workers, for we want to make all the workers prosperous, people leading a prosperous and fully cultured life. One would think that the point was clear, and commenting, I love that he said that, because that is true of so many things that have been distorted either by ultra-leftists or by rightists. In this particular case, I'm reminded of a certain LaRouche-influenced quote-unquote socialist, who years ago made a video, "Billionaires and Communism? No contradiction," and was like, well, in communism, everyone's rich, everyone's a billionaire. That's not what it means, you know that's not what it means. Anyway, continuing. There was no point in overthrowing capitalism in October 1917 and building socialism all these years if we're not going to secure a life of plenty for our people. Socialism does not mean poverty and privation, but the abolition of poverty and privation. It means the organization of a prosperous and cultured life for all members of society. And yet this clear and essentially elementary slogan has caused a good deal of perplexity, confusion, and muddle among a section of our party members. Is not this slogan, they ask, a reversion to the old slogan, "Enrich yourselves," that was rejected by the party? If everyone becomes prosperous, they go on to say, and the poor cease to exist, upon whom then are we Bolsheviks to rely in our work? How shall we work without the poor? This may sound funny, but the existence of such naive and anti-Leninist views among a section of party members is an undoubted fact which we must take into account. Evidently, these people do not understand that a wide gulf lies between the slogan, "Enrich yourselves," and the slogan, "Make all the collective farmers prosperous." In the first place, only individual persons or groups can enrich themselves, whereas the slogan concerning a prosperous life applies not to individual persons or groups, but to all collective farmers. Secondly, individual persons or groups enrich themselves for the purpose of subordinating other people to themselves and exploiting them. Comment, key point here. If you haven't understood that, please return to the beginning and start over. Continuing. Whereas the slogan concerning a prosperous life for all the collective farmers, with the means of production in the collective farms socialized, precludes all possibility of the exploitation of some persons by others. Thirdly, the slogan "Enrich yourselves" was issued in the period when the new economic policy, or NEP, was in its initial stage, when capitalism was being partly restored, when the kulak was a power, when individual peasant farming predominated in the country and collective farming was in a rudimentary state. Whereas the slogan, "Make all the collective farmers prosperous," was issued in the last stage of NEP, when the capitalist elements in industry had been abolished, the kulaks in the countryside crushed, individual peasant farming forced into the background, and the collective farms had become the predominant form of agriculture. This is apart from the fact that the slogan, "Make all the collective farmers prosperous," was not issued in isolation, but inseparably bound up with the slogan, "Make the collective farms Bolshevik." Is it not clear that, in point of fact, the slogan "Enrich yourselves" was a call to restore capitalism? Comment, and again, that was in the NEP period immediately following World War I and the Revolutionary War, when the Soviet government was trying to stabilize the economy, socialize everything that it could, and then leave the rest for later. Again, this period lasted less than a decade before they were onto the project of dismantling the NEP and moving on to socialism. Continuing. Whereas the slogan, "Make all the collective farmers prosperous," is a call to deal the final blow to the last remnants of capitalism by increasing the economic power of the collective farms and by transforming all collective farmers into prosperous working people. Voices from the crowd here call out, "Quite right." Is it not clear that there is not and cannot be anything in common between these two slogans? Voice is again quite right. As for the argument that Bolshevik work and socialism are inconceivable without the existence of the poor, it is so stupid that it is embarrassing even to talk about it. Leninists rely upon the poor when there exist capitalist elements and the poor who are exploited by the capitalists. But when the capitalist elements have been crushed and the poor have been emancipated from exploitation, the task of Leninists is not to perpetuate and preserve poverty and the poor, the conditions for whose existence have already been eliminated, but to abolish poverty and to raise the poor to a life of prosperity. It would be absurd to think that socialism can be built on the basis of poverty and privation, on the basis of reducing personal requirements and lowering the standard of living to the level of the poor, who themselves, moreover, refuse to remain poor any longer and are pushing their way upward to a prosperous life. Who wants this sort of socialism so-called? It would not be socialism, but a caricature of socialism. Socialism can be built only on the basis of a vigorous growth of the productive forces of society, on the basis of an abundance of produce and goods, on the basis of the prosperity of the working people, on the basis of a vigorous growth of culture. For socialism, Marxist socialism, means not the reduction of individual requirements, but their development to the utmost, to full bloom, not the restriction of these requirements or a refusal to satisfy them, but the full and all-around satisfaction of all the requirements of culturally developed working people. There can be no doubt that this confusion in the views of certain members of the party concerning the poor and prosperity is a reflection of the views of our ultra-leftist blockheads who idealize the poor as the eternal bulwark of Bolshevism under all conditions, and who regard the collective farms as an arena of fierce class struggle. As you see, here too, on this question, the remnants of the ideology of the defeated anti-party groups have not yet lost their tenacious hold on life. It is obvious that had such blockheaded views triumphed in our party, the collective farms would not have achieved the successes they have gained during the past 2 years, and they would have disintegrated in a very short time. Or take, for example, the national question. Here too, in the sphere of the national question, just as in the sphere of other questions, there is in the views of a section of the party a confusion which creates a certain danger. I've spoken of the tenacity of the survivals of capitalism. It should be observed that the survivals of capitalism in people's minds are much more tenacious in the sphere of the national question than in any other sphere. They are more tenacious because they are able to disguise themselves well in national costume. Many think that Skripnik's fall from grace was an individual case, an exception to the rule. This is not true. The fall from grace of Skripnik and his group in the Ukraine is not an exception. Similar aberrations are observed among certain comrades in other national republics as well. What is the deviation towards nationalism, regardless whether it is a matter of the deviation towards Great Russian nationalism or the deviation towards local nationalism? The deviation towards nationalism is the adaptation of the internationalist policy of the working class to the nationalist policy of the bourgeoisie. The deviation towards nationalism reflects the attempts of, quote, one's own, quote, national bourgeoisie to undermine the Soviet system and to restore capitalism. The source of both these deviations, as you see, is the same. It is a departure from Leninist internationalism. If you want to keep both deviations under fire, then aim primarily against this source, against those who depart from internationalism, regardless whether it is a matter of the deviation towards local nationalism or the deviation towards Great Russian nationalism. Here there is stormy applause. There is a controversy as to which deviation represents the chief danger, the deviation towards Great Russian nationalism or the deviation towards local nationalism. Under present conditions, this is a formal and therefore a pointless controversy. It would be foolish to attempt to give ready-made recipes suitable for all times and for all conditions as regards the chief and the lesser danger. Such recipes do not exist. The chief danger is the deviation which we have ceased to fight, thereby allowing it to grow into a danger to the state. Here there is prolonged applause. In the Ukraine, only very recently, the deviation towards Ukrainian nationalism did not represent the chief danger. But when the fight against it ceased, and it was allowed to grow to such an extent that it linked up with the interventionists, this deviation became the chief danger. The question as to which is the chief danger in the sphere of the national question is determined not by futile, formal controversies, but by a Marxist analysis of the situation at the given moment, and by a study of the mistakes that have been committed in this sphere. The same should be said of the right and ultra-left deviations in the sphere of general policy. Here too, as in other spheres, there is no little confusion in the views of certain members of our party. Sometimes, while fighting against the right deviation, they turn away from the ultra-left deviation and relax the fight against it, on the assumption that it is not dangerous or hardly dangerous. This is a grave and dangerous error. It is a concession to the ultra-left deviation which is impermissible for a member of the party. It is all the more impermissible for the reason that, of late, the ultra-lefts have completely slid over to the position of the rights, so that there is no longer any essential difference between them. We have always said that the ultra-lefts are in fact rights who mask their rightness by left phrases. Let's read that again. We have always said that the ultra-lefts are in fact rights who mask their rightness by left phrases. Continuing. Now the ultra-lefts themselves confirm the correctness of our statement. Take last year's issues of the Trotskyist Bulletin. What do Messieurs the Trotskyists demand? What do they write about? In what does their ultra-left program find expression? They demand the dissolution of the state farms on the grounds that they do not pay, the dissolution of the majority of the collective farms on the grounds that they are fictitious, the abandonment of the policy of eliminating the kulaks, reversion to the policy of concessions, and the leasing to concessionaires of a number of our industrial enterprises on the grounds that they do not pay. There you have the program of these contemptible cowards and capitulators, their counter-revolutionary program of restoring capitalism in the USSR. What difference is there between this program and that of the extreme rights? Clearly there is none. It follows that the ultra-lefts have openly associated themselves with the counter-revolutionary program of the rights in order to enter into a bloc with them, comment refer back to the August bloc, continuing, and to wage a joint struggle against the party. How can it be said after this that the ultra-lefts are not dangerous or hardly dangerous? Is it not clear that those who talk such rubbish bring grist to the mill of the sworn enemies of Leninism? As you see here too, in the sphere of deviations from the line of the party, regardless of whether we are dealing with deviations on general policy or with deviations on the national question, the survivals of capitalism in people's minds, including the minds of certain members of our party, are quite tenacious. There you have some of the serious and urgent problems of our ideological and political work on which there is lack of clarity, confusion, and even direct departure from Leninism in certain strata of the party. Nor are these the only questions which could serve to demonstrate the confusion in the views of certain members of the party. After this, can it be said that all is well in the party? Clearly it cannot. Our tasks in the sphere of ideological and political work are 1. To raise the theoretical level of the party to the proper height, 2. To intensify ideological work in all the organizations of the party, 3. To carry on unceasing propaganda of Leninism in the ranks of the party, 2. To train the party organizations and the non-party active which surrounds them in the spirit of Leninist internationalism. 5. Not to gloss over but boldly to criticize the deviations of certain comrades from Marxism-Leninism. 6. Systematically to expose the ideology and the remnants of the ideology of trends that are hostile to Leninism. 2. Questions of organizational leadership. I've spoken of our successes. I've spoken of the victory of the party line in the sphere of the national economy and of culture, and also in the sphere of overcoming anti-Leninist groups in the party. I have spoken of the historic significance of our victory, but this does not mean that we have achieved victory everywhere and in all things, and that all questions have already been settled. Such successes and such victories do not occur in real life. We still have plenty of unsolved problems and defects of all sorts. Ahead of us is a host of problems demanding solution. But it does undoubtedly mean that the greater part of the urgent and immediate problems has already been successfully solved, and in this sense the very great victory of our party is beyond doubt. But here the question arises, how was this victory brought about? How was it actually achieved? As the result of what fight? As the result of what efforts? Some people think that it is sufficient to draw up a correct party line, proclaim it for all to hear, state it in the form of general theses and resolutions, and have it voted for unanimously for victory to come of itself, automatically as it were. That of course is wrong. It is a gross delusion. Only incorrigible bureaucrats and red tapists can think so. As a matter of fact, these successes and victories did not come automatically, but as the result of a fierce struggle for the application of the party line. Victory never comes of itself. It is usually won by effort. Good resolutions and declarations in favor of the general line of the party are only a beginning. They merely express the desire for victory, but not the victory itself. After the correct line has been laid down, after a correct solution of the problem has been found, success depends on how the work is organized, on the organization of the struggle for carrying out the party line, on the proper selection of personnel, on checking upon the fulfillment of the decisions of the leading bodies. Otherwise, the correct line of the party and the correct solutions are in danger of being seriously prejudiced. More than that, after the correct political line has been laid down, organizational work decides everything, including the fate of the political line itself, its success or failure. As a matter of fact, victory was achieved and won by a systemic and fierce struggle against all sorts of difficulties in the way of carrying out the party line. By overcoming these difficulties, by mobilizing the party and the working class for the task of overcoming the difficulties, by organizing the struggle to overcome the difficulties, by removing inefficient executives and choosing better ones, capable of waging the struggle against difficulties. What are these difficulties and where do they lie? They are difficulties of our organizational work, difficulties of our organizational leadership. They lie in ourselves, in our leading people, in our organizations, in the apparatus of our party, Soviet, economic, trade union, Young Communist League, and all other organizations. We must realize that the strength and prestige of our party and Soviet, economic, and all other organizations and of their leaders have grown to an unprecedented degree. And precisely because their strength and prestige have grown to an unprecedented degree, it is their work that now determines everything, or nearly everything. There can be no justification for references to so-called objective conditions. Now that the correctness of the party's political line has been confirmed by the experience of a number of years, and that there is no longer any doubt as to the readiness of the workers and peasants to support this line, the part played by so-called objective conditions has been reduced to a minimum, whereas the part played by our organizations and their leaders has become decisive, exceptional. What does this mean? It means that from now on, 9/10 of the responsibility for the failures and defects in our work rest not on objective conditions, but on ourselves and on ourselves alone. We have in our party more than 2 million members and candidate members. In the Young Communist League, we have more than 4 million members and candidate members. We have over 3 million worker and peasant correspondents. The Society for the Promotion of Air and Chemical Defense has more than 12 million members. The trade unions have a membership of over 17 million. It is to these organizations that we are indebted for our successes. And if, in spite of the existence of such organizations and of such possibilities which facilitate the achievement of successes, we still have quite a number of shortcomings in our work, and not a few failures, then it is only we ourselves, our organizational work, our bad organizational leadership that are to blame for this. Bureaucracy and red tape in the administrative apparatus, idle chatter about leadership in general instead of real and concrete leadership, the functional structure of our organizations and lack of individual responsibility, lack of personal responsibility in work and wage equalization, the absence of a systematic check on the fulfillment of decisions, fear of self-criticism, these are the sources of our difficulties. This is where our difficulties now lie. It would be naive to think that these difficulties can be overcome by means of resolutions and decisions. The bureaucrats and red tapists have long been past masters in the art of demonstrating their loyalty to party and government decisions in words, and pigeonholing them in deed. In order to overcome these difficulties, it was necessary to put an end to the disparity between our organizational work and the requirements of the political line of the party. It was necessary to raise the level of organizational leadership in all spheres of the national economy to the level of political leadership. It was necessary to see to it that our organizational work ensured the practical realization of the political slogans and decisions of the party. In order to overcome these difficulties and achieve success, it was necessary to organize the struggle to eliminate them. It was necessary to draw the masses of the workers and peasants into this struggle. It was necessary to mobilize the party itself. It was necessary to purge the party and the economic organizations of unreliable, unstable, and degenerate elements. What was needed for this? We had to organize 1. Full development of self-criticism and exposure of shortcomings in our work. 2. The mobilization of the party, Soviet, economic, trade union, and Young Communist League organizations for the struggle against difficulties. 3. The mobilization of the masses of the workers and peasants to fight for the application of the slogans and decisions of the party and of the government. 4. Full development of emulation and shock brigade work among the working people. 5. A wide network of political departments of machine and tractor stations, and state farms, and the bringing of the party and Soviet leadership closer to the villages. 6. The subdivision of the people's commissariats, chief boards and trusts, and the bringing of economic leadership closer to the enterprises. 7. the abolition of lack of personal responsibility in work, and the elimination of wage equalization. 8. The elimination of the functional system, the extension of individual responsibility, and a policy aiming at the abolition of collegium management. And then in point 9, I just have to add a note here that the text breaks off and actually copies a later part up into this section of the text, and let me tell you, the first round of recording this, I was very confused by that and didn't catch it for a few minutes, so I spent a while there going, didn't I just read this already? So anyway, point 9 says stronger checking on the fulfillment of decisions and a policy aiming at the reorganization of the, and then it breaks off. I believe that the text should then skip to the line starting with, besides the incorrigible bureaucrats and red tapists, but I'm not sure what, if anything, got cut off in what would have been that middle section there, and I did try to look up other copies of this online. Actually, the 2 copies I found both had the same error. Although, who knows, maybe Stalin was reading from notes and mixed up the pages and read one of them twice and it just got recorded that way. Probably not, though. Anyway, besides the incorrigible bureaucrats and red tapists, as to whose removal there are no differences of opinion among us, there are 2 other types of executive who retard our work, hinder our work, and hold up our advance. One of these types of executive consists of people who rendered certain services in the past. People who have become bigwigs, who consider that party decisions and Soviet laws are not written for them but for fools. These are the people who do not consider it their duty to fulfill the decisions of the party and of the government, and who thus destroy the foundations of party and state discipline. What do they count upon when they violate party decisions and Soviet laws? They presume that the Soviet government will not venture to touch them because of their past services. These over-conceited bigwigs think that they are irreplaceable, and that they can violate the decisions of the leading bodies with impunity. What is to be done with executives of this kind? They must unhesitatingly be removed from their leading post, irrespective of past services. Voices call out, quite right. They must be demoted to lower positions, and this must be announced in the press. Quite right. This is essential in order to bring those conceited bigwig bureaucrats down a peg or two, and to put them in their proper place. This is essential in order to strengthen party and Soviet discipline in the whole of our work. Quite right, and applause. And now about the second type of executive. I have in mind the windbags. I would say honest windbags. Here there's laughter. People who are honest and loyal to the Soviet power, but who are incapable of leadership, incapable of organizing anything. Last year, I had a conversation with one such comrade, a very respected comrade, but an incorrigible windbag, capable of drowning any live undertaking in a flood of talk. Here's the conversation. And here Stalin puts his collar up, turns around so that his back is facing the audience. He's doing something to his hair with his hands, and then he turns around and says, I think it would go a little something like this. Stalin, how are you getting on with the sewing? Comrade, with the sewing, Comrade Stalin? We have mobilized ourselves. Here there's laughter. Stalin, well, and what then? Comrade, we have put the question squarely. Laughter again. Stalin, and what next? Comrade, there is a turn, Comrade Stalin. Soon there will be a turn. Laughter. Stalin, but still? Comrade, we can see an indication of some improvement. Laughter. Stalin, but still, how are you getting on with the sewing? Comrade, so far, Comrade Stalin, we have not made any headway with the sewing. Here there's general laughter. There you have the portrait of the windbag. They have mobilized themselves, they have put the question squarely, they have a turn and some improvement, but things remain as they were. This is exactly how a Ukrainian worker recently described the state of a certain organization when he was asked whether that organization had any definite line. Well, he said, as to a line, they have a line all right, but they don't seem to be doing any work. General laughter. Evidently, that organization also has its honest windbags. And when such windbags are dismissed from their post and are given jobs far removed from operative work, they shrug their shoulders in perplexity and ask, why have we been dismissed? Did we not do all that was necessary to get the work done? Did we not organize a rally of shock brigaders? Did we not proclaim the slogans of the party and of the government at the conference of shock brigaders? Did we not elect the whole of the political bureau of the Central Committee to the honorary presidium? General laughter here. Did we not send greetings to Comrade Stalin? What more do you want of us? More general laughter. What is to be done with these incorrigible windbags? Why, if they were allowed to remain on operative work, they are capable of drowning every live undertaking in a flood of watery and endless speeches. Obviously, they must be removed from leading posts and given work other than operative work. There is no place for windbags on operative work. Quite right, and applause. I've already briefly reported how the Central Committee handled the selection of personnel for the Soviet and economic organizations, and how it strengthened the checking on the fulfillment of decisions. Comrade Kaganovich will deal with this in greater detail in his report on the third item of the Congress agenda. I should like to say a few words, however, about further work in connection with increased checking on the fulfillment of decisions. The proper organization of checking on the fulfillment of decisions is of decisive importance in the fight against bureaucracy and red tape. Are the decisions of the leading bodies carried out, or are they pigeonholed by bureaucrats and red tapists? Are they carried out properly, or are they distorted? Is the apparatus working conscientiously and in a Bolshevik manner, or is it working to no purpose? These things can be promptly found out only by a well-organized check on the fulfillment of decisions. A well-organized check on the fulfillment of decisions is the searchlight which helps to reveal how the apparatus is functioning at any moment, and to bring bureaucrats and red tapists into the light of day. We can say with certainty that 9/10 of our defects and failures are due to the lack of a properly organized check on the fulfillment of decisions. There can be no doubt that with such a check on fulfillment, defects and failures would certainly have been averted. But if checking on fulfillment is to achieve its purpose, two conditions at least are required. Firstly, that fulfillment is checked systematically and not spasmodically. Secondly, that the work of checking on fulfillment in all sections of the party, Soviet, and economic organizations is entrusted not to second-rate people, but to people with sufficient authority, to the leaders of the organizations concerned. The proper organization of checking on fulfillment is most important of all for the central leading bodies. The organizational structure of the workers' and peasants' inspection does not meet the requirements of a well-devised system for checking on fulfillment. Several years ago, when our economic work was simpler and less satisfactory, and when we could count on the possibility of inspecting the work of all the people's commissariats and of all the economic organizations, the workers' and peasants' inspection was adequate. But now, when our economic work has expanded and has become more complicated, and when it is no longer necessary or possible to inspect it from one center, the workers' and peasants' inspection must be reorganized. What we need now is not an inspection, but a check on the fulfillment of the decisions of the center. What we need now is control over the fulfillment of the decisions of the center. We now need an organization that would not set itself the universal aim of inspecting everything and everybody, but which could concentrate all its attention on the work of control, on the work of checking on fulfillment of the decisions of the central bodies of the Soviet power. Such an organization can be only a Soviet Control Commission under the Council of People's Commissars of the USSR, working on assignments of the Council of People's Commissars and having representatives in the localities who are independent of the local bodies. And in order that this organization may have sufficient authority and be able, if necessary, to take proceedings against any responsible executive, candidates for the Soviet Control Commission must be nominated by the Party Congress and endorsed by the Council of People's Commissars and the Central Executive Committee of the USSR. I think that only such an organization could strengthen Soviet control and Soviet discipline. As for the Central Control Commission, it is well known that it was set up primarily and mainly for the purpose of averting a split in the party. You know that at one time there really was a danger of a split. You know that the Central Control Commission and its organization succeeded in averting the danger of a split. Now there is no longer any danger of a split. But on the other hand, we are urgently in need of an organization that could concentrate its attention mainly on checking the fulfillment of the decisions of the party and of its Central Committee. Such an organization can be only a Party Control Commission under the Central Committee of the CPSUB, working on assignments of the party and its Central Committee and having representatives in the localities who are independent of the local organizations. Naturally, such a responsible organization must have great authority. In order that it may have sufficient authority and be able to take proceedings against any responsible executive who has committed an offense, including members of the Central Committee, the right to elect or dismiss the members of this commission must be vested only in the supreme organ of the party, viz. The Party Congress. There can be no doubt that such an organization will be quite capable of ensuring control over the fulfillment of the decisions of the central organs of the party and of strengthening party discipline. That is how matters stand with regard to questions of organizational leadership. Our tasks in the sphere of organizational work are 1. To continue to adapt organizational work to the requirements of the political line of the party. 2. To raise organizational leadership to the level of political leadership. 3. To secure that organizational leadership fully ensures the implementation of the political slogans and decisions of the party. I'm coming to the end of my report, comrades. What conclusions must be drawn from it? Everybody now admits that our successes are great and extraordinary. In a relatively short time of space, our country has been transferred onto the lines of industrialization and collectivization. The first 5-year plan has been successfully carried out. This arouses a feeling of pride among our workers and increases their self-confidence. That is very good, of course, but successes sometimes have their seamy side. They sometimes give rise to certain dangers, which, if allowed to develop, may wreck the whole work. There is, for example, the danger that some of our comrades may become dizzy with successes. There have been such cases among us, as you know. There is the danger that certain of our comrades, having become intoxicated with success, will get swelled heads and begin to lull themselves with boastful songs, such as, "It's a walkover," "We can knock anybody into a cocked hat," etc. This is not precluded by any means, comrades. There is nothing more dangerous than sentiments of this kind, for they disarm the party and demobilize its ranks. If such sentiments gain the upper hand in our party, we may be faced with the danger of all our successes being wrecked. Of course, the first 5-year plan has been successfully carried out. That is true. But the matter does not and cannot end there, comrades. Before us is the second 5-year plan, which we must also carry out, and successfully too. You know that plans are carried out in the course of a struggle against difficulties, in the process of overcoming difficulties. That means that there will be difficulties, and there will be a struggle against them. Comrades Molotov and Kuybyshev will report to you on the second 5-year plan. From their reports, you will see what great difficulties we shall have to overcome in order to carry out this great plan. This means that we must not lull the party, but sharpen its vigilance. We must not lull it to sleep, but keep it ready for action. Not disarm it, but arm it. Not demobilize it, but keep it in a state of mobilization for the fulfillment of the second 5-year plan. Hence the first conclusion. We must not become infatuated with the successes achieved, and must not become conceited. We have achieved successes because we have had the correct guiding line of the party, and because we have been able to organize the masses for putting this line into effect. Needless to say, without these conditions, we should not have achieved the successes that we have achieved, and of which we are justly proud. But it is a very rare thing for ruling parties to have a correct line and to be able to put it into effect. Look at the countries which surround us. Can you find many ruling parties there that have a correct line and are putting it into effect? Actually, there are now no such parties in the world, for they are all living without prospects. They are floundering in the chaos of the crisis and see no way of getting out of the swamp. Our party alone knows in what direction to steer its course, and it is going forward successfully. To what does our party owe its superiority? To the fact that it is a Marxist party, a Leninist party. It owes it to the fact that it is guided in its work by the teaching of Marx, Engels, and Lenin. There can be no doubt that as long as we remain true to this teaching, as long as we have this compass, we shall achieve successes in our work. It is said that in some countries in the West, Marxism has already been destroyed. It is said that it has been destroyed by the bourgeois nationalist trend known as fascism. That, of course, is nonsense. Only people who are ignorant of history can talk like that. Marxism is the scientific expression of the fundamental interests of the working class. To destroy Marxism, the working class must be destroyed. But it is impossible to destroy the working class. More than 80 years have passed since Marxism came into the arena. During this time, scores and hundreds of bourgeois governments have tried to destroy Marxism. And what has happened? Bourgeois governments have come and gone, but Marxism has remained. Here there is stormy applause. Moreover, Marxism has achieved complete victory on 1/6 of the globe. Moreover, it has achieved victory in the very country in which Marxism was considered to have been utterly destroyed. Stormy applause again. It cannot be regarded as an accident that the country in which Marxism has achieved complete victory is now the only country in the world which knows no crises and unemployment, whereas in all other countries, including the fascist countries, crisis and unemployment have been reigning for 4 years now. No, comrades, that is no accident. Prolonged applause here. Yes, comrades, our successes are due to the fact that we have worked and fought under the banner of Marx, Engels, and Lenin. Hence, the second conclusion, we must remain true to the end to the great banner of Marx, Engels, Lenin. Here there's applause. The working class of the USSR is strong not only because it has a Leninist party that has been tried and tested in battle. Further, it is strong not only because it enjoys the support of the vast masses of the laboring peasants, it is strong also because it is supported and assisted by the world proletariat. The working class of the USSR is part of the world proletariat, its advanced detachment, and our republic is the cherished child of the world proletariat. There can be no doubt that if our working class had not had the support of the working class in the capitalist countries, it would not have been able to retain power, it would not have secured the conditions for socialist construction, and consequently, it would not have achieved the successes that it has achieved. International ties between the working class of the USSR and the workers of the capitalist countries, the fraternal alliance between the workers of the USSR and the workers of all countries, this is one of the cornerstones of the strength and might of the Republic of Soviets. The workers in the West say that the working class of the USSR is the shock brigade of the world proletariat. That is very good. It means that the world proletariat is prepared to continue rendering all the support it can to the working class of the USSR. But it imposes serious duties upon us. It means that we must prove by our work that we deserve the honorable title of Shock Brigade of the Proletarians of all countries. It imposes upon us the duty of working better and fighting better for the final victory of socialism in our country, for the victory of socialism in all countries. Hence the third conclusion. We must be true to the end to the cause of proletarian internationalism, to the cause of the fraternal alliance of the proletarians of all countries. Here there's applause. Such are the conclusions. Long live the great and invincible banner of Marx, Engels, and Lenin. Here there is stormy and prolonged applause from the whole hall. The Congress gives Comrade Stalin an ovation. The International is sung, after which the ovation is resumed with renewed vigor. There are shouts of hurrah for Stalin, long live Stalin, and long live the CC of the party. And that is the end of the text as published in Pravda number 27, January 28, 1934. So, what did you think? Leave a question or comment below, and we will continue the discussion in the comment section as always. Otherwise, thanks for listening. And thanks to the current patrons and Buy Me a Coffee supporters whose names are on the screen. If you'd like to get your name on the screen, head to patreon.com/socialismforall or buymeacoffee.com/socialismforall. Every donation is encouraging, they are also materially helpful, and they allow me to spend a lot more time on this channel than I would be able to do without that support. So if you like this channel, have learned something from it, want to see more from it, and to help others learn from it as well, thank me, but also thank a patron or Buy Me a Coffee supporter and consider becoming one yourself. Beyond that, engagement counts, so like, share, subscribe, and leave a comment, even if it's just for the algorithm. And remember, we can agitate and educate online, but the organizing happens in real life, so make sure to take what you've learned here into your real-world political activity. Thanks again, and we will see you in the next video.